Hey friends, welcome to my channel, Beautiful Disaster, where we take a deep dive into some of the most iconic events and people in history. We'll be breaking down true crime, vintage Hollywood, and more. And while we do that, we can also be writing in our journals as well as I tell these most iconic stories. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so that you never miss an upload. And also remember to turn on that notification button as well so you don't miss out on any new content. Now, let's get into the RMS Titanic. For those who don't know much about the Titanic was a British luxury passenger vessel that sank on April 14th, April 15th of 1912, and it was traveling from Southampton, England to New York. It is regarded as one of the most infamous disasters in modern history. When the Titanic sank, it took the lives of 1,500 passengers and crew members. And various stories, films, and musical performances have been produced on this tragedy. Movies like A Night to Remember, the James Cameron 1997 Titanic, and the Titanic miniseries. The miniseries was quite interesting. It has Catherine Zeta-Jones in it, and I would recommend to watch that because that was something. It was like if I'm not mistaken, a 2 episode, and it was okay for the most part, but her character was something else. But anyway, the A Night to Remember, that one is considered to be most accurate because the director actually went by the survivors' testimony. So he basically filmed the movie as basically what the testimonies were, like what the passengers were doing and what they were thinking and feeling and everything. It's actually a pretty good movie. It is in Technicolor, and I think they had like a black and white version, of course. It's on YouTube for free. I will post that link down in the bottom bar for you guys, in the description bar for you guys, if you are interested in actually watching it. But it was pretty good. I liked it. But anyway, during the 1900s, the passenger trade between the US and Europe was very highly competitive, and some of their prominent companies that competed in this industries were White Star and Cunard. So in 1907, the two companies actually poised to expand their market share. For Cunard, they ended up launching 2 new ships called the RMS Mauretania and the RMS Lusitania. 2 new ships actually caught the attention of the public due to their expected speed. So White Star chairman Bruce Ismay met with William Perry, who was the owner of a shipyard firm based in Belfast called Harland and Wolff, and together they came up with a plan to build a new class of large ships that would be more comfortable for their passengers, especially for their third-class passengers. They eventually decided to build 3 new ships, which was the Titanic, the Olympic, and the Britannic. And during the early 1900s, there were various stern ship companies that were operating out of there, but one of these was the RMS Titanic. And during that time, there was a lot of competition as well between White Star and other companies, but mostly Cunard was considered their rivals at the time. The company was to actually have the vessels be able to sail across the Atlantic in 5 days. This was a huge blow for White Star Line, as their previous flagship vessels, such as the Teutonic and the Majestic, were already competing in the 1800s. So White Star Line knew that if they were going to beat the other companies, they would have to build new class of ships. So instead of building the biggest and the fastest ship in the world, White Star Line decided that they would build vessels that would set standards in the terms of luxury and size. basically William Perry and Ismay worked together to plan out the various details of the company's new vessels. They wanted to build the most luxurious ocean liner ships that the world has ever seen. The Titanic also featured a variety of first class accommodation. For first class, it had like 4 elevators. Their standard first class cabins had dressing table, a horsehair sofa, which I think is like, I try to look it up, I think it's like a certain type of leather. But yeah, they call it a horsehair sofa. They also had, like, for their standard cabins, like their wardrobe, they also had marble top wash stand basins. For first class, their bathrooms were actually shared, but it was divided by gender, of course, like restrooms for the ladies and restrooms for the men. And it had 39 suites where it was more private, and then even where they had separate servant quarters on board. So if you want to bring your nanny, bring your footman, you don't have to worry about them being anywhere near you. And also they also had a restaurant called A La Carte restaurant, which was exclusively only to the first class. And it was basically, they try to base it off of like the imitation of the Ritz Hotel. But by the time like the Titanic was pretty much built, the gross registered tonnage of the Titanic was 46,328 tons. When fully loaded, it weighed over 52,000 tons, and at its widest point, it measured at 92.5 feet wide. For Thomas Andrew, who helped design the Titanic, he was part of a group called the Guarantee Group. Thomas Andrew knew the ship inside and out, which made him very important to the success of the project. Without his help, the crew members, the captain, they would not have known how long Titanic had before it floundered, went to the bottom of the Atlantic if it wasn't for him. The Titanic made several stops along its way to pick up additional passengers and crew members as well. One of these was Southampton, which was the last stop before it headed to New York. The ship picked up various food and coal. It also took in 80,000 pounds of meat, 7,000 pounds of potatoes, 10,000 pounds of sugar, 2,050 barrels of flours, and thousands of gallons of milk. The Titanic could actually hold approximately 4,500 tons of coal, which is enough to fuel its entire voyage. Getting the coal for the voyage had been a bit of a challenge due to the recent coal strike that occurred in the UK. The strike was resolved actually on April 6th, but however, the White Star Line had to plan to ensure that the ship's main voyage didn't get affected by this coal shortage. So they decided to transfer coal from other ship vessels. By doing this, some of the passengers on the other ship vessels were then transferred to the Titanic. So if they were going to be sailing to America or Paris or whatever, they were basically going to be sailing on the Titanic due to all the other ships giving White Star Line their coal for their voyage. So Titanic was actually set sail from Southampton, England on April 10th, 1912. It would then start to make its way to New York City. It was actually named the Millionaire Special because of its captain, which was Edward Smith, who was known to be very, very popular among the rich passengers. Some of the prominent individuals who actually boarded the Titanic included Benjamin Guggenheim, who was basically an American businessman, William Stead, who was a British journalist, Isidore and Ida Strauss, they are the owners of the famous department store Macy's. They were also aboard the ship. Now, when I tell you that this voyage was just almost just off to a bad start, I mean, it was pretty much almost to a bad start, because the Titanic voyage almost got into a collision before it was stopped by a tugboat that was dislodged from its stern due to the vessel's suction. It sailed through the incident, thankfully, and didn't run into any other ships. It made its way to Cherbourg, France. Since the city in France, in Cherbourg, France, the city dock was too small to actually fit this massive vessel, so the passengers actually had to be ferried to and from the ship. Some of the passengers who actually boarded the ship was John Jacob Astor, his pregnant wife Madeline. John Jacob Astor actually was like a multi-millionaire, but in today's terms he would be considered a billionaire. So he was like the richest on the ship. And also, of course, we cannot forget Miss Margaret Brown, also known as Molly Brown, or aka the unsinkable Molly Brown. She was on the ship as well. She was actually going to America to take care of her grandson, who was really ill. So that's why she was on her way to America, was to help to take care of him. The ship actually continued its journey for about 2 hours. On April 12th, it made a stop in Ireland, Queenstown, and then after that it set sail for New York City around 1:30 p.m. Throughout the course of the voyage, the Titanic wireless radio operator Harold Bride and Jack Phillips were receiving like various iceberg warnings. They were mainly responsible for relaying messages from the passengers, because that's where they mostly make their money. They weren't like working for a White Star Line. They were actually contracted out, and this was considered normal for it wasn't unusual for other like ship liner companies to actually contract out. Also had the job duty of making sure that they get those iceberg warnings to the captain, so they have to make sure that they get that. Now, during the voyage, it's unknown as to why Captain Smith actually ended up canceling the emergency evacuation procedures that you usually do when you're on a cruise ship. At around 10:50 p.m., the passenger vessel, the Californian, which was also traveling in the area where the icebergs were known, informed Titanic that it had actually stopped due to the ice. Titanic's lookouts were Reginald Lee and Frederick Fleet were tasked with looking for icebergs. They were not able to actually find them due to the ocean's unusually calm conditions. Also, they did not have their binoculars. It was locked away in a locker, and they did not have the key. The person who was like actually was supposed to have been on the Titanic was a man named David Blair, and he actually ended up getting replaced by Captain Smith. And when he was packing up, from what I can understand, when he was packing up his belongings to get off the ship, because they ended up changing a few things and all that stuff, because actually Captain Smith wasn't even supposed to be sailing the Titanic. He was supposed to be on the Olympic, but Olympic had to actually go in for some repairs, so he wasn't even supposed to be there. But at the last minute, they were just switching out crew members and stuff, and so David Blair was one of them that had to get off the ship. And while he was packing his bags and trying to quickly get off the ship before Titanic actually started his voyage, he accidentally had the keys to the locker, and he accidentally took the keys with him. And it wasn't until like I think 3 days later he realized he had the keys to the locker. Like, I don't know what that locker looked like, but couldn't somebody just break the damn locker and get the freaking keys out? I'm like, come on, y'all. But yeah, so because of this, for some reason of not, you know, then I guess they just didn't want to damage the property or something. I'm not sure, but I would have broke the freaking locker. I'm like, you're not gonna have me as a lookout, and it's dark, it's a moonless night, and I can't see dilly squat. I need some binoculars. Like, this is crazy. So that's the reason why Reginald and Frederick wasn't able to see as clear, because they didn't have those binoculars. Because basically the night that the Titanic sank, it was called a cold water barrage, where basically a moonless night, there's no water kind of moving, splashing against the icebergs, and it's like a layer, almost like a mirage, basically like a glass mirage. And so with that, they wouldn't be able to see the iceberg until they were right up on it. So, and also I did look to see if the binoculars would even help, and a lot of the historians and scientists said that it wouldn't have helped at all. It wouldn't have helped, because the Californian, when they were trying to figure out what was going on, it didn't even help them. So yeah, that was interesting. And also, I forgot to mention that at around 9:40 p.m. the Spanish ship Mesaba sent out a warning. There was something in the message that was missing that Harold and Jack didn't really catch, didn't really understand. So I guess it was like a symbol or something that was missing, and without whatever it was supposed to be in there, it was considered not emergency, a non-emergency iceberg warning instead. But really, from the coordinates and everything, from what I've been researching and everything, it was important. But the fact that Bride and Phillips didn't relay that message to the bridge, because they felt like, oh, okay, well, it's not an emergency, so I'm gonna keep doing my job and relaying the message to, you know, whatever the passengers, for the passengers continue doing my work. But to me, it's like, okay, if you get an iceberg warning, you should start what the hell you're doing. Relay that message up to the bridge, like, go give that to the captain. And because they did not, I feel like that's probably one of the other faults, like red flags, that was part of Titanic's demise. So as they're sailing along and everything, the captain did ended up, you know, going down a different route away from the ice fields, but not even realizing that he was about to head into a huge iceberg that will end Titanic and so many lives on that vessel. So around 10:50 p.m. Lookout Lee and Fleet, they spotted an iceberg 400 nautical miles from the Newfoundland, Canada. The first officer, William Murdoch, ordered the ship to change its direction and to reverse its engines. Even though the Titanic started to go in reverse, it was still slightly moving. It was too close to the iceberg. The starboard side of the vessel scraped along the ice. When this happened, this is when William Murdoch, the first officer, informs the captain when he came back onto the bridge that they tried to port round it and put the engines in reverse, but the Titanic still hit. This is when Thomas Andrews comes up to the deck and basically tries to find out what has happened. He then goes down and discovered that several of the ship's watertight compartments had been ruptured. The water from the areas would sink into the forward compartments, causing them to spill over into the succeeding ones. This was the reason why eventually the Titanic ended up sinking. According to some experts, though, if the Titanic had hit the iceberg head on, it would have probably survived. However, by reversing its engines, the vessel was reduced to a speed slower than it was moving at. So Phillips was ordered by Captain Smith to send a distress signal. One of these was received by the Carpathia around 12:20 a.m. on April 15th. However, since the passenger vessel was almost 58 nautical miles away from the Titanic, it would receive the distress signal, but it almost basically took 3 hours for them to reach the Titanic. Other ships, including the Olympic, also responded to the Titanic's distress call. However, they were too far away to reach the ship. One of the ships that was spotted near the Titanic was the Californian, but like I said before, its wireless was turned off that night after that whole idea when they were telling the Titanic, hey, they stopped for the night because of the ice fields. So their wireless was turned off. As the Titanic tried to contact other ships, it began to also prepare the lifeboats as well. Titanic, according to Thomas Andrews, as how long they have, he said about an hour and a half before she sinks. After finding this out from Andrews that the Titanic only has an hour and a half to live before it is in the bottom of the Atlantic, he starts to tell his crew to basically get the lifeboats ready. And this is where it gets a little foggy. So Lighthauler goes to the captain and says, hey, should we load the women and children on first? And the captain said yes. Lighthauler took that as women and children only, but William Murdoch took it as put the women and children on, but however, if there's no women and children around, put the men on. Basically, every life matters. I don't know. I try to look it up to see why or any of the testimonies as to how in the world that Lighthauler got that completely mixed up with women and children only. If you actually look into it, I ended up finding that Murdoch actually saved more people than Lighthauler, because he was saying, okay, women and children, but if there was no women and children around, like I said, he would put the men on in order to fill those seats. In the James Cameron movie, where you see Thomas Andrews coming up to Lighthauler and saying, I just counted people in those boats. Why are you launching these boats half full? There's only 12 people in that boat. And Lighthauler says, well, we weren't sure of the weight. We thought it may buckle. And Thomas Andrews says, what are you talking about? These lifeboats were tested in Belfast. They can hold up to 70 men. Fill these lifeboats up. Stop sending them half full. And so that's when Lighthauler kind of like looks around, and he knew he messed up, and he started to fill the lifeboats up with more women and children. Since the emergency practice drill was canceled by Captain Smith, if it wasn't canceled, they would have known this, and the evacuation would have been a bit more smoother if they would have not had canceled that drill. Right, lifeboat number 7 was the first to leave the ship. It only had 27 passengers. As the passengers waited to board the lifeboats, they were provided with the entertainment by the Titanic's musicians. Some reports actually end up claiming that the group played various songs for a long time to be able to calm down everyone before, you know, it really was noticeable that, you know, the Titanic was sinking. Basically, they said that they played all the way through until the Titanic sank. One of the songs that is claimed that they heard them play was Nearer My God to Thee. And this is just like one of the survivors' testimonies that said that they played until the very end. By 1 a.m., water was seen at the base, which was E deck of the grand staircase. Amid the growing panic, several male passengers tried to board lifeboat number 14, causing 5th Officer Harold Lowe to fire his gun 3 times. Around this time, Phillips' distress calls reflected a growing desperation, as one noted that the ships cannot last much longer. As the Titanic bow continued to sink, the stern began to rise out of the water, placing incredible strain on the midsection. At around 2 a.m., the stern pillars were clearly visible above the water, and all of the lifeboats that remained on the ship were 3 collapsible boats. Smith released the crew, saying that, quote unquote, it's every man for himself. He was reportedly last seen in the bridge, and his body was never found. But at approximately 2:18 a.m., the lights of the Titanic finally went out, and then the Titanic ended up breaking in 2 with the bow going underwater. Reports later speculated that it took approximately 6 minutes for the section to likely travel at approximately 30 miles, which is 48 kilometers per hour, to reach the ocean bottom. The stern momentarily settled back in the water before rising again, eventually becoming vertical. It briefly remained in the position before beginning its final plunge. At 2:20 a.m., the ship foundered as the stern also disappeared beneath the Atlantic. Water pressure allegedly caused the section, which still had air inside, to implode as it sank. Hundreds of passengers and crew went into the icy water, fearful of being swamped. Those in the lifeboats delayed returning to pick up survivors. By the time they rowed back, almost all the people in the water had died from exposure. The 3rd class, which was the most vulnerable group, only survived with around 170 individuals. Contrary to popular belief, steerage passengers were not prevented from boarding the lifeboats. Many people in the 3rd class did not realize the severity of the situation until it was too late, as the captain did not have a general alarm. Some of the women stayed with their sons and husbands, while others decided to go to the top deck after the lifeboats were launched. The Carpathia reached the area at around 3:30 a.m. It took over an hour to reach the location where the Titanic sank. First to reach the Titanic was lifeboat number 2. The Carpathia picked up all of the survivors in the next couple of hours. In a message to the White Star Line's offices, Ismay, who was able to get onto a lifeboat, he ended up surviving. Ismay stated that the Titanic had been hit by an iceberg and that it sank on the morning of April 15th. California arrived at around 8:30 a.m. It had been informed about the incident a few hours earlier. The Carpathia reached New York at around 9 a.m. It was able to meet the massive crowd that was waiting for it on April 18th. The investigation and the aftermath of the disaster actually revealed that the majority of those who died were crew members and 3rd class passengers. Many prominent and wealthy families lost members, such as John Jacob Astor and Ida and Isidore Strauss. The rising popularity of the Titanic and the celebrities who boarded it added to the tragedy of the sinking. Around 2 o'clock a.m., a nearby ship reportedly left the area. So basically around 2:20 a.m. when Titanic sank, that's when they were like, oh, well, okay, I guess they left. The U.S. investigation concluded that the British Board of Trade was partly responsible for the disaster. Other contributing factors included the actions of Captain Smith, because they said he was going too fast. It seems like he was not slowing down, even though he had ice warnings and everything, and he was still speeding. The testimony of the crew of the Californian was about 20 nautical miles from the Titanic was highly scrutinized. According to the crew members, they saw a ship, but it was too small for the Titanic, which brings us back to the cold water mirage. They also noted that their attempts to contact it using Morse code lamps were unsuccessful. After seeing the rockets, the crew informed Captain Stanley Lord, who was already retired for the night. Instead of turning on the ship's radio, Lord told them to continue using the Morse code lamps. Basically, the Board of Trade. The investigation in Britain was conducted by the Board of Trade, the agency that was criticized by the investigators in the US for not having adequate lifeboat requirements. The judge who led the investigation was Sir John Charles Bingham, was the one who conducted. According to the reports, the Titanic's death was caused by a collision with an iceberg, which was the cause of the excessive speed of the ship. However, Sir John noted that he could not blame Captain Smith. He said that he was only following the recommendations of other skilled individuals. So according to the investigator, the liner was individuals. So according to the investigator, the liner was around 5 to 10 nautical miles from the Titanic. They claim that she could have saved many lives. Basically, they're saying that Captain Lord's ship could have saved many lives if they would have just turned on their damn radio, but they didn't. Both the British and the U.S. investigation also presented their own safety recommendation. In 1913, a safety conference was organized in London. It resulted in the creation of rules requiring ships to have lifeboats for every passenger, as well as regular drills for the entire voyage. The Californian crew members did not hear the distress signal from the Titanic, so they also maintained a 24-hour radio silence. The North Atlantic Ice Patrol was also created to keep ships safe by warning them about the presence of icebergs in the shipping lanes. In 1985, Robert Ballard, a French scientist and an American expedition team, traveled to the Atlantic Ocean. Their goal was to test the capabilities of a 16-foot long submarine known as the Argo. The goal of the expedition was to send the submersible to the ocean's floor to collect data and video. The first images of the Titanic were taken on September 1st, 1985. Later showed that the ship was lying upright in two sections. Although its bow was clearly visible, the stern section had been severely damaged. Like, it looks like a bomb hit that back part of that ship. The stern looks unrecognizable. Oh my God. After reaching the Titanic, the scientists discovered that the ship's various features were gradually deteriorating due to the presence of the iron eating the microbes. So the Titanic, which was about 13 nautical miles from its position when it sent its distress signals, has been explored numerous times by unmanned and manned submersibles. During these expeditions, they were not able to find traces of a massive gash in the hull that was believed to have been the cause by the iceberg. They also discovered that the impact had caused various gashes in the hull. The gashes were produced by the brittle fractures in the seams of the ship's adjacent sections. In In subsequent years, various pieces of the Titanic were discovered by marine salvage crews. The documents and artifacts from the builder archives led to speculation that the Titanic sinking was caused by weak rivets or low quality steel. The Titanic became a cultural icon due to the numerous interpretations and retellings of the disaster. It inspires various movies, like I mentioned before, such as the James Cameron Titanic and A Night to Remember. In the 21st century, the artifacts from the Titanic became the basis of a successful exhibit. A profitable business was also established to transport tourists to the site of the disaster. Many people oppose the idea of removing the artifacts from the shipwreck due to their cultural significance. But however, since the pieces are in international waters, they are not subject to the jurisdiction. They're not subject to the jurisdiction of any nation. Thousands of people visit the various museums dedicated to the Titanic each year. In 2012, the Titanic Belfast was opened on the site of the former shipyard of Harold and Wolff, which became a tourist attraction. Despite the deteriorating condition of the Titanic, it is still expected to remain an iconic figure in the public imagination. But I do want you to tell me down below what was your favorite part of the Titanic in the comment section down below. Be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss any new content from me. I hope that you enjoyed the video and my nasally voice. Hopefully I can get over this sinus infection and sound a little bit better. Next time, my beautiful disaster fans, be safe and take care. Bye-bye.